I never imagined that abandoning my kingdom would be the only way to truly find myself. For years, my life had been a meticulously choreographed dance of power, privilege, and pretense, played out against the opulent backdrop of my Hamptons estate, a sprawling testament to Thorn Industries' formidable reach. The sunrise over the Atlantic, painting the expansive windows of my master suite in hues of fire and gold, no longer stirred anything within me. It was just another expensive alarm clock, signaling the relentless march of another day, filled with board meetings, hostile takeovers, and the soulless pursuit of ever more zeros on a balance sheet. My name, Jonathan Thorn, was synonymous with success, a titan of industry whose decisions moved markets and shaped destinies. Yet within the gilded cage of my own making, I was utterly, profoundly lost. My days were a blur of high thread count sheets, bespoke suits, and the sterile hum of a jet engine whisking me between New York, London, and Tokyo. Meals were elaborate affairs, often eaten alone or with business associates whose smiles never quite reached their eyes. Conversations were strategic, laden with unspoken agendas and veiled threats. Even my leisure, rounds of golf at exclusive clubs, yacht excursions to tropical islands, felt like an extension of my corporate persona, another box to check on the list of what a man of my standing should be doing. The mansion itself, a monument to unchecked ambition, was perpetually bustling with staff, yet echoed with an unbearable solitude. Maria, my housekeeper, for the better part of 2 decades, was perhaps the only person who saw past the facade, her quiet observations cutting through the noise with an almost unsettling clarity. She'd offer a cup of Earl Grey precisely when my stress levels peaked, or leave a worn copy of a classic novel on my nightstand without a word, knowing instinctively what I needed even when I couldn't articulate it myself. The true fracture began with the impending acquisition of Sterling Robotics. It was a deal, whispered through the hallowed halls of Wall Street, that would cement Thorn Industries' dominance in artificial intelligence, making us virtually unchallengeable. But Sterling Robotics wasn't just a company. It was the lifeblood of Willow Creek, a quaint town upstate, employing nearly everyone and boasting a deeply embedded, community-focused ethos. My advisors presented the numbers with clinical precision. The jobs lost, the local businesses decimated, the pension funds obliterated, all acceptable collateral damage for a significant bump in our quarterly earnings. Mr. Henderson, my stoic legal counsel, laid out the severance packages like an autopsy report, detailing the minimum required by law, nothing more. My gut twisted. I saw faces in my mind's eye. Not abstract figures, but the hard-working men and women I'd seen in documentaries about small-town America struggling to make ends meet. This wasn't about innovation. It was about pure, unadulterated power, crushing a smaller, more ethical competitor simply because we could. That evening, as I stared at the signed documents waiting for my final approval, the ink on the page seemed to bleed into a dark, unforgiving stain. The faces of the Sterling Robotics employees flashed before me, their livelihoods hanging by the thread of my pen stroke. I saw the faces of children who would miss out on college, families who would lose their homes, a whole community collapsing under the weight of my corporate ambition. It was a stark contrast to the life I led, where luxury was my baseline and financial security an afterthought. The world I inhabited was so far removed from theirs that the very concept of job security felt like a cruel joke played on the less fortunate. The numbers that made my board members salivate felt like a death knell for real people, a moral bankruptcy that no amount of philanthropy could ever truly absolve. I found myself pacing the length of my study, the mahogany gleam of the shelves reflecting a distorted version of my own agitated figure. Every Picasso, every rare first edition, every award glinting on the mantelpiece seemed to mock me. They were trophies of a war I no longer wished to fight, symbols of a life I suddenly found utterly repellent. My father, a man who built this empire from scratch, had often warned me about the insidious nature of success, how it could hollow out a man from the inside if he wasn't careful. "Johnny," he'd said to me once, his eyes clouded with a weariness I hadn't understood then, "the higher you climb, the harder it is to see the ground, to remember the hands that built the ladder." That memory, sharp and poignant, cut through the suffocating luxury of my surroundings like a sliver of ice. I saw my reflection in the polished glass of a framed photograph. A younger me, just out of business school, brimming with an idealism that had long since been calcified by ambition. My father's words echoed, a phantom limb of conscience suddenly aching with an unbearable truth. I looked at the contract one last time, the weight of 1,000 destinies resting on my next decision. It wasn't just a business deal, it was a moral crossroad. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that if I signed it, I would lose the last shred of myself. The pressure mounted in the days that followed, a relentless assault on my already frayed nerves. Media outlets, particularly the financial news channels, were abuzz with speculation about the Sterling Robotics acquisition. Analysts waxed poetic about the synergies and market consolidation that would ensue, completely oblivious to the human cost. My board members, a pack of sleek, well-fed wolves, circled constantly, their thinly veiled impatience palpable. "Johnny, what's the hold-up?" Mr. Sterling, a man whose face I privately thought of as a perfectly ironed suit, asked during a hurried video conference, his voice dripping with faux concern. "We're losing momentum. Time is money, you know." He punctuated the phrase with a dismissive wave of his manicured hand, as if the concept of time itself was a personal affront to his quarterly projections. I felt trapped, a fly caught in a spider's web of my own spinning. My lavish mansion, once a sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage, each room a testament to a life I no longer recognized as my own. One evening, I stumbled upon an old photograph tucked away in a dusty box in the attic. It was of me, perhaps 20 years old, fresh-faced and grinning, standing beside a ramshackle lemonade stand I'd built myself. My first entrepreneurial venture, before the millions, before the power, before the crushing weight of expectation. I remembered the simple joy of counting the change, the pride in every glass sold. That boy, full of unadulterated hope and a naive belief in making a difference, stared back at me, a ghost from a life unburdened. The contrast was stark, almost unbearable. The youthful idealism had been slowly, incrementally eroded by the demands of the corporate beast, replaced by a cynical shell. I couldn't sign the Sterling Robotics deal, but I couldn't face the music either. The thought of confronting my board, admitting a moral failing in a world that only understood profit, was terrifying. They would see it as weakness, an unforgivable lapse in judgment. I wouldn't just lose respect, I'd lose control. So in the dead of night, a desperate, illogical yet utterly compelling idea took root. I would disappear. Not just from the deal, but from my entire life. I would shed the skin of Jonathan Thorne, billionaire, and become someone else, someone anonymous, unburdened by the weight of an empire built on compromises and moral sacrifices. It was an act of profound cowardice, yet it felt like the only path to self-preservation. I spent the next few days meticulously planning my escape. I emptied a small, rarely used personal account, converting a modest sum into cash. I bought a burner phone. I researched small towns, far from the glare of metropolitan life, places where a stranger might blend in rather than stand out. My grand mansion, with its intricate security systems, suddenly felt like a perfect stage for a vanishing act. I decided against leaving a note, knowing it would only complicate matters, fuel speculation, and leave a trail. But there was one person I couldn't simply leave in the dark, one person I needed to send a signal to, a coded message that only she would understand. Maria. She had seen me at my absolute worst, the solitary breakdowns after my father's death, the moments of crushing doubt, the rare instances when the mask of corporate invincibility slipped. She had served me with quiet dignity, her presence a balm in the sterile chaos of my life. She was a woman of unwavering integrity, a single mother who worked tirelessly to provide for her two daughters, a woman who understood the true value of a dollar and the dignity of honest labor. I trusted her implicitly, far more than any board member, lawyer, or even extended family. My plan relied on her understanding, her intuition. I left a small, heavy silver locket, a family heirloom that belonged to my mother, on my bedside table, deliberately placed beside a specific dog-eared page in a book about American folk art. On that page was a faint pencil mark next to a description of a small, quiet village upstate known for its antique shops and peaceful pace of life. It was a long shot, a gamble on Maria's keen observation and loyalty. The last time I saw Maria before I left, she was dusting the grand piano in the living room, her movements graceful and precise. Our eyes met across the vast expanse of the room. I didn't say a word, but I felt my desperation, my internal struggle, nakedly exposed. Her gaze was unreadable, yet I sensed a profound understanding there, a silent acknowledgement of the storm brewing within me. She gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture I might have imagined if it hadn't felt so resonant, so profoundly knowing. It was a micro-trigger, a tiny spark that ignited a desperate hope that she, and only she, would somehow intuit my plea, my silent cry for escape. As I made my final preparations, a snippet of news drifted from the flat-screen TV in the kitchen, a financial reporter with a grim expression discussing the imminent Sterling Robotics acquisition. "Industry insiders predict significant restructuring," he announced, "and a substantial workforce reduction in Willow Creek. It's a harsh reality, but an inevitable consequence of progress." The words hung in the air, a final, chilling confirmation of the moral dilemma that had broken me. My decision to disappear wasn't just an escape, it was an abdication of responsibility, a desperate attempt to sever myself from the consequences of a system I had helped create. But at that moment, fleeing felt like the only way to retain a shred of my humanity. With a deep, shuddering breath, I slipped out of the mansion, leaving Jonathan Thorne, the hidden billionaire, behind, stepping into the uncertain, terrifying freedom of anonymity. My new life began in Northport, a sleepy little town upstate, nestled beside a tranquil lake. The contrast with my former existence was so stark it was almost comical. No private jets, no gourmet meals prepared by a personal chef, just a beat-up Ford pickup I'd bought with cash and the best damn chili cheeseburger I'd ever eaten at a local diner. I rented a small, unassuming cabin on the outskirts of town, far from anything resembling luxury. My assumed name was John Smith, deliberately generic, designed to attract no attention. I introduced myself as a carpenter looking for work, and thanks to some surprisingly useful skills I'd picked up during a brief stint working construction in my college days, I landed a job easily enough. My hands, once accustomed to expensive fountain pens and ergonomic keyboards, now ached from hauling lumber and swinging a hammer. But it was an honest ache, a satisfying fatigue that tasted far better than the bitter emptiness of my previous exhaustion. The rhythm of Northport was slow, deliberate. People said hello on the street, not out of obligation or strategic calculation, but out of genuine neighborliness. My co-workers at the lumberyard, a burly crew with calloused hands and a penchant for bad jokes, treated me like just another guy. They didn't know Jonathan Thorne, the billionaire. They knew John Smith, the new guy who could surprisingly hold his own with a power saw. I learned to appreciate the simple things, the smell of fresh-cut wood, the hearty laughter of my colleagues during lunch breaks, the satisfaction of a job well done. It was a world away from the sterile sophistication of the Hamptons, and in its raw, unpolished authenticity, I found an unexpected sense of peace. This, I told myself, was it. I had solved the problem. By disappearing, by shedding the gilded skin of my old life, I had escaped the moral quagmire, the endless demands, the soulless pursuit of wealth. I was free. This new existence, a carefully constructed illusion of anonymity, felt like a genuine liberation. I was John Smith, a working man, responsible only for himself. I went fishing on the lake on weekends, read books from the local library, and even started a small vegetable garden. The gnawing guilt over the sterling robotics deal began to recede, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph. I was no longer an instrument of destruction. I was a creator, building simple things with my own hands. This false exit, this self-imposed exile, had become my sanctuary, a place where I truly believed I could finally outrun my past. One afternoon, sitting at the counter of Mum's diner, slurping down a chocolate milkshake after a long day's work, I found myself genuinely laughing with Frank, a grizzled old-timer who owned the lumberyard. He was recounting a ridiculously embellished story about a raccoon that had terrorized his chickens. It was a simple, unadulterated moment of shared humor, a warmth spreading through me that felt foreign and utterly wonderful. I hadn't laughed like that in years, not a real, belly-aching laugh that made my eyes water. It was a micro-trigger, a tiny, insignificant event in the grand scheme of things, but it underscored the profound shift within me. For the first time, I felt truly seen as a human being, not as a walking balance sheet. This man knew nothing of my former life, my billions, my empire. He just saw John, the new guy who laughed at his corny jokes. It was liberating in a way all the private jets and five-star resorts never could be, but the illusion of perfect peace was fragile, constantly threatened by echoes of the world I'd left behind. Flickers of my past would occasionally pierce the tranquil bubble of Northport. A local newspaper, casually picked up at the general store, carried a small article about the mysterious disappearance of billionaire Jonathan Thorne, alongside a grainy, unflattering photo of me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a primal fear seizing me. The headline, though relegated to page 6, felt like a giant spotlight shining directly on my hiding place. I quickly folded the paper, stuffing it into a trash can, my hands trembling. The investigation was still active, still searching. I was living on borrowed time, always one step away from exposure. I had a few close calls. Once, while grabbing a coffee at the local Starbucks, I saw a familiar face, a former associate from a minor venture capital firm, browsing the shelves. My breath hitched. I ducked behind a display of coffee beans, my heart pounding in my ears like a drum. He walked past, oblivious, his eyes scanning the various bags, never once glancing in my direction. The relief was immense, almost debilitating. These micro-triggers, these moments of near discovery, served as stark reminders of the thin ice I skated on, of the constant threat of my carefully constructed anonymity crumbling. Meanwhile, back at the Hamptons mansion, Maria was navigating a different kind of storm. The police had questioned her, polite but persistent. My family, distant cousins and second-tier relatives who suddenly materialized, treated her with a mixture of suspicion and entitlement, as if she was somehow responsible for my vanishing act. The board, panicked by my absence and the stalling sterling robotics deal, grilled her relentlessly, convinced she harbored some secret knowledge. She knew, of course. She understood the cryptic message, the locket, the marked page in the folk art book. That particular book was a collection of stories and illustrations from small American towns, towns that emphasize community and simple living. It was my mother's favorite, one I'd often read aloud to Maria's daughters when they were little, and visited the mansion on her days off. Maria remembered my longing for something simpler, something more real. She remembered my pain. I had confided in Maria just weeks before I disappeared, a rare moment of vulnerability in my highly guarded life. We were in the kitchen, a space usually reserved for the staff, but I'd found myself there late one night, unable to sleep. She was preparing a late-night snack for me, a simple turkey sandwich, knowing my preference for understated comfort food over anything elaborate. "Maria," I'd begun, my voice barely a whisper, "do you ever feel like like you're drowning in your own life." She had paused, her hands still on the cutting board, but her eyes meeting mine with a depth of understanding that surprised me. "The mansion, the company, it's all so much. It's not just the responsibility, it's the weight of it, the expectations. It's a gilded cage." She didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. Instead, she simply said, "Mr. Thorne, sometimes the heaviest chains are the ones you can't see." That moment, that shared vulnerability, had forged a unique bond between us, a silent promise of understanding that transcended our employer-employee relationship. It cemented her loyalty, not to Jonathan Thorne, the billionaire, but to the struggling man she had glimpsed beneath the polished facade. So, when the authorities questioned her, Maria offered them nothing but polite, bewildered ignorance. She knew I needed this, whatever this was. She knew I was searching for something profound, something far more valuable than the billions I'd left behind. She felt the heavy weight of the secret, the pressure from all sides, but her loyalty to me, forged in those quiet moments of shared humanity, was stronger. She was torn between her conscience and her loyalty, between the potential legal repercussions and the silent plea in my eyes that night I left. She carried my secret like a precious, fragile burden, knowing that its revelation would unravel not just my carefully constructed new life, but perhaps her own as well. If you had everything, would you have the courage to walk away from it all for a chance at true peace? And if you knew where that person was hiding, would you protect their secret, knowing the chaos it left behind? One crisp autumn morning, as I was sweeping fallen leaves from the porch of my cabin, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. My heart leaped into my throat. Had they found me? Was this the end of my quiet masquerade? I braced myself, my muscles tensing, ready to run, to fight, to vanish again if necessary. A worn minivan, nothing fancy, pulled up, and the driver's side door opened. Out stepped Maria, her familiar, composed figure framed against the vibrant backdrop of the fall foliage. My breath caught in my throat. She wasn't just wearing her usual simple yet elegant clothes. She was holding a small brown paper bag, the kind you'd get from a local bakery. She looked directly at me, her gaze unwavering, a complex mix of relief, concern, and a touch of something akin to exasperation in her eyes. "John," she said, her voice soft but firm, a ripple of her usual formality, or should I say, Mr. Thorne. The roles had indeed inverted. I was no longer the hidden billionaire orchestrating my own disappearance. I was simply John Smith, the carpenter, exposed, vulnerable, and profoundly grateful. Maria, my housekeeper, now held my secret, and by extension, my fate, in her hands. She walked slowly towards me, and as she reached the porch, she extended her hand, not with the paper bag, but with something small and metallic. It was the silver locket, glinting in the morning sun, the very heirloom I'd left behind, a silent testament to her unwavering loyalty and profound understanding. "You left this behind," she said simply, "and I believe it belongs to you." My throat tightened. It was more than just a locket. It was a micro-trigger, a physical manifestation of our unspoken bond, a sign that she had understood my desperate coded plea. We sat on the porch, the silence between us heavy with unspoken questions and shared history. Maria finally broke it. "Your company, Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice tinged with a solemnity I rarely heard. "It's not doing well. The Sterling Robotics deal is falling apart, and the investors are panicking. They're saying Thorne Industries is in freefall without its leader. People are losing their jobs, not just at Sterling, but within your own company." She spoke without judgment, merely stating facts, but each word was a hammer blow to my carefully constructed peace. My escape hadn't resolved anything. It had simply created a different kind of chaos, a vacuum of leadership that was now consuming the very people I had hoped to protect, or at least avoid harming. The newspaper article I'd seen about job losses was now a reality, amplified and directed squarely at my conscience. She then pulled a folded newspaper from her bag, the headlines screaming, "Thorn Industries in turmoil, billionaire's absence causes market panic." Below it was a photo of my family, my aunt, my cousins, looking distraught, besieged by reporters. "Your family is struggling too, Mr. Thorne. They're being hounded, blamed for your disappearance. It's a mess." Her words were a stark mirror, reflecting the true cost of my selfish decision. My peace was built on the backs of others' suffering, a fragile illusion sustained by my absence. The image of their pained faces, a stark contrast to the simple joy I'd found in my anonymous life, hit me with the force of a physical blow. The irony was bitter. I had run away to avoid hurting people, only to cause a different, perhaps greater kind of pain. Have you ever kept a secret so profound you knew it could change everything for someone you cared about? She asked, her eyes searching mine, not for an answer but for understanding. Her question wasn't accusatory. It was an invitation to introspection, a challenge to the flimsy justification I had built for my escape. I had fled a moral dilemma, only to create a larger, more intricate web of consequences. My disappearance wasn't an act of freedom. It was an act of profound cowardice, leaving others to deal with the fallout. Maria, in her quiet, unassuming way, had held a mirror to my soul, and I didn't like what I saw. The peace I had so desperately sought was a lie, a selfish delusion. Maria, in her quiet, unwavering way, began to lay bare the truth I had desperately tried to bury. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice gentle yet firm, "you ran. You ran from a fight, and in doing so you left a battlefield for others to clean up. Is that truly peace, or just a more comfortable form of surrender?" Her words cut through my self-deception like a surgeon's scalpel. She spoke not of money or power, but of duty, of responsibility, of the quiet dignity of facing one's actions, however ugly. She reminded me of the people whose livelihoods were now genuinely at risk, not because of a hostile takeover, but because their leader had simply vanished. "You told me once that the weight of the company was crushing you, but what about the weight of knowing your absence is crushing others?" Her unwavering gaze forced me to confront the stark reality of my choices. My escape to Northport, initially perceived as an act of liberation, was slowly revealing itself as an act of profound selfishness. I had sought personal peace at the expense of everyone else. The joy I'd found in simple labor, the genuine laughter with my co-workers, now felt tainted, built upon the crumbling foundations of the empire I had abandoned. This was turn 4, the bitter, inescapable realization of my own fault. My disappearance didn't solve my moral dilemma, it merely postponed it, amplifying the consequences for those left behind. The peace I had clung to was a fragile, self-serving illusion. I realized the profound hypocrisy of seeking authenticity while abandoning my responsibilities. I saw the pain in Maria's eyes, the quiet burden she carried, and understood that my flight had weighed heavily on her too. The internal conflict raged within me. Should I return to the gilded cage, face the humiliation, the legal battles, the scorn of my board, and try to salvage Thorn Industries? Or should I continue my anonymous life, knowing that my empire was collapsing, taking countless livelihoods with it? The decision wasn't about power anymore. It was about integrity. It was about whether I was a man of principles, or merely a man who could afford to run away from them. Could I live with myself, knowing the chaos I had wrought, while I tended my garden and built furniture for a living? The choice was agonizing, a tearing of my very soul. Then, a local news segment flickered on the small TV in the corner of the cabin, showing a reporter standing in front of the Sterling Robotics factory in Willow Creek. The factory doors were padlocked, and a small crowd of disheartened employees stood outside, holding signs protesting the looming bankruptcy. One woman, her face streaked with tears, spoke into the microphone. "My husband and I have worked here for 30 years. Our kids went to college because of this factory. Now we have nothing. And Jonathan Thorne? He just vanished. Where's the justice in that? It was a micro-trigger that struck me with the force of a lightning bolt. Their faces, their pain, their genuine despair. It wasn't a spreadsheet calculation anymore. It was real. It was visceral. It was my doing. That woman's face was etched into my mind, a poignant symbol of the human cost of my actions. I had wanted to avoid being a part of the problem, but my absence had made me an even greater architect of their suffering. The realization shattered me. I wasn't just a billionaire who disappeared. I was a coward who had shirked his responsibility. The moral compass I thought I was following by running away had spun wildly off course, leading me to a destination of deeper regret. My quiet existence in Northport, my carefully cultivated anonymity, suddenly felt like a hollow mockery of true peace. It was nothing more than an elaborate escape from consequences, a luxury afforded only to someone who could truly afford to disappear. Maria was right. I hadn't found peace. I had merely chosen a different form of self-imprisonment, one built on guilt rather than gold. The silence that had once brought me solace now amplified the screams of my conscience. The following morning, after a long, sleepless night, I made my decision. It was a choice born not of ambition, but of a profound, aching sense of responsibility. I would return, not as Jonathan Thorne, the invincible titan, but as a humbled man ready to face the music, to clean up the mess I had made. The thought of stepping back into that world, the glare of the media, the accusations, the disdain of my peers, filled me with dread. But it was a dread tempered by a strange, quiet resolve. I turned to Maria, my voice thick with emotion. "You were right," I confessed, the words raw and difficult to utter. "I wasn't finding peace here. I was just hiding. Thank you, Maria. Thank you for showing me what I couldn't see." Her eyes softened, a flicker of something akin to maternal pride replacing the earlier exasperation. "Sometimes, Mr. Thorne," she replied, "the greatest strength is knowing when to come home, even when home is the hardest place to be." Her wisdom, always understated, always profound, had been the true compass guiding me back. My return to New York was anything but triumphant. It was a maelstrom of flashing cameras, aggressive reporters, and a phalanx of bewildered lawyers. The headline across every major financial newspaper screamed, "Billionaire Jonathan Thorne resurfaces. Questions swirl amidst corporate chaos." I faced the board, not with defiance, but with a stark honesty that left them speechless. I admitted my failings, my moral cowardice in abandoning them and the company. I immediately initiated a plan to reverse the Sterling Robotics deal, even if it meant a significant financial hit. I restructured Thorne Industries, not just to focus on profit, but on ethical responsibility, establishing a foundation to support struggling communities and invest in sustainable practices. It was a painful, often humiliating process. I lost some of my most influential board members, several key investors pulled out, and my public image took a beating. My fortune, though still considerable, diminished significantly as I redirected funds towards community rebuilding and ethical initiatives. My personal life, too, was irrevocably altered. My family, though relieved to have me back, struggled to understand my transformation, our relationships forever strained by my unexplained absence. This was turn 5, the ambiguous conclusion. Justice, of a sort, was made. I was no longer an invisible force, but a man held accountable. But it came with profound emotional loss. The glittering facade of my old life lay in shards. I was no longer the unchallengeable titan, but a figure of controversy, a billionaire who chose conscience over pure profit. Maria, though she remained my housekeeper, became something more. A confidant, a moral anchor, a quiet reminder of the path I had chosen. She would sometimes catch my eye across the vast living room, a knowing look passing between us, a silent acknowledgement of the new, complicated reality we both inhabited. The Hamptons mansion still loomed large, a testament to a life I had once lived and then abandoned. But the man who walked through its doors again wasn't a hidden billionaire, consumed by guilt and the emptiness of endless acquisition. He was just a man, finally visible, his heart scarred but whole, ready to face the complexities of a life redefined by loss, redemption, and a profound, hard-won understanding of what truly mattered. And if, in the end, escaping your own empire meant finding a more profound truth, what would you have done? The Hamptons mansion still loomed large, but the man who walked through its doors again wasn't a hidden billionaire. He was just a man, finally visible.